we're awakening from the economic dark ages. Like the fact that we still think we can print money or pass laws, or that politicians can really do anything for an economy. The only thing a politician can do positively for an economy is quit and dismantle the state.
They're not incentivized to solve the problem because they're in charge of solving that problem. So if it gets solved, then they go away. There's no real stop to that because there's always money printing ultimately that funds these activities. If you think you're immune from propaganda, you probably don't understand how propaganda works.
The archetypal example that comes to mind is from each according to their ability to each according to their need.
Societal change almost always happens when enough people are uncomfortable. Things get so bad that they say, oh, we have to do something different now.
Even if you don't understand that your dollar savings were being pilfered by the U.S. government through inflation to fund that murder campaign, you can't wash your hands entirely of it. You are complicit to some extent.
Thankfully, we have a conscience and we have some guide to what's right and what's wrong. But it requires a significant amount of virtue. Following what you know to be right is not easy.
What is the right path toward decentralized capitalism? You've written how many books now?
5.
5 books.
Well, I mean, you were in on one of them.
Co-authored one of them with you, yes. Yes, thank God for Bitcoin. Us and 6 other fabulous people. What are you going to write more books?
I'd like to. I mean, I think the big thing is figuring out what I like, something worth saying, right? And having an audience that I really want to address. Like those are the 2 ingredients that I think you need before you write a book. I mean, just sort of writing for the sake of writing is like an exercise in narcissism to me. So I don't want to do that. But you know, if there's like a particular audience that I want to address and something interesting that I can say to them, then yeah. But it's not always obvious what that could be. I mean, there is one that I definitely want to write eventually, which is like basically a case for Bitcoin maximalism. Although, you know, some people have addressed it, but you know, this is like a perpetual confusion in our industry. Right?
Yeah,
like
for
just
sure.
People think altcoins and Bitcoin are the same or something like that, and just making that case absolutely clear and just preventing people from going down that altcoin path, I think would be pretty beneficial. But you know,
what's your elevator? If you had the elevator pitch someone on Bitcoin versus shitcoin or Bitcoin maximalism, like how do you approach that?
The main thing is that altcoins are like fiat 2.0, right? Like it has all of the same vulnerabilities of fiat money, except it's like way scammier in many ways because like they kind of get around regulation in many ways through like this veneer of decentralization, which they don't have. They're able to print their own money. So it's like very attractive to folks that don't really want to work for the money, right? Like they just sort of want to print it into existence. But a lot of it's honestly kind of played out the last, I don't know, 7 years or so. It's used to be like, okay, yeah, we have this coin that's going to, you know, create this value through doing something for some, but like pretty much the last 7 years have proven that all of those promises have been for nothing. Right? Like there's like a deep depression in the altcoin industry for that reason, because they're like, yeah, I mean, you keep saying this stuff, but no one actually fulfills it. And we're at a point where it's gone completely nihilistic, where the only coins that are popular at the moment are like meme coins, right? And this is like no utility whatsoever. It's just completely like a will to power currency. And it's like, okay. And those things pump and dump way faster than the previous ones used to. And you know, that's kind of the state they're at. So I don't even know if I need to write the book, because in a sense, like all of that's played out there, and like people don't trust like altcoin pitches anymore. That's why all the altcoin VCs are all like down on, you know, they're all, you know, pretty down from their initial seed capital or whatever. So, you know.
Yeah. I've been very surprised how each cycle that idea seems to adapt. Like you mentioned meme coins. I hadn't even heard about these until I was having dinner with a couple of guys in New York, and they were bringing it up. I was like, "What is that?" And it's basically shitcoin of this cycle, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we joke that Bitcoin's an IQ test. Like you got to kind of sift through all of the crypto garbage to ultimately realize that Bitcoin's the only, you know, the operative word is decentralized. Basically, it's like Bitcoin is decentralized. Everything else is not. But there's also kind of like an ethical test built into that, I think. That it's like you see if people are really pushing hard on crypto, it's what you just said. They're trying to get money without the sacrifice or the work. And so, yeah, it becomes a pretty good heuristic for who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say that categorically. It's like some people might think they're working on a crypto project and not have nefarious intentions, but when you really kind of peel back all the layers, it's like how this thing you're calling decentralized is not decentralized. So the whole thing is built on sand, so to speak.
Yeah. And in that way, it's very much like Fiat 2.0.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that think they're like providing value by working at an investment bank. I work 100 hours a week and I'm doing all this stuff, but really they're not. They're rent seeking, right?
Yeah.
And that's I think where a lot of these altcoins are like it's becoming more and more clear, right? Because I mean, meme coins don't purport to do anything. I mean, it's
they're just memes. Yeah,
they're literally just memes, and it's pumping and dumping. And you're right in the sense that there's it's a virtue test, because if you have any virtue whatsoever, you would be saying this makes no sense. There's absolutely no value being provided, and you know, if you're still going into that stuff, then you're making it clear that you have no interest in providing value for money. It's just trading and or like getting lucky at best, and maybe at worst, it's just straight up scamming people.
Yeah. I do have a little pity for like the retail participant though, because I feel like so much of the crypto universe is intentionally obfuscated and made to sound, you know, there's a lot of innovation theater occurring, and a lot of people that don't get it, they're just sort of swept up in the veneer. And so there's like a little bit of forgiveness in my heart for certain people, but then there's people that are perpetrating those scams. They're like, you guys are just.
Well, I mean, that used to be the case, right? But like at a certain point, if you're going and buying dog with hat, right? Like, why would you buy that, right? Like, there's no like reasonable case to be made that dog with hat is like something that provides value.
Don't people make the argument about art? It's like, oh, it's art.
I mean, it's literally dog with hat, right? Like it's based on like, it's like a duplicate of Dogecoin essentially, like, which is what Shiba Inu was, or for whatever reason, it's you know, meme coins sort of go in that direction. I mean, at this point, it's just so obvious, and there are no arguments being made that, you know, this is going to provide value or create any innovation. I mean, that was essentially like 2 cycles ago when it was, oh yeah, there's actually going to be innovation. I don't blame them nearly as much, but by now 2024, it's so obvious that like meme coins are basically the only thing left, because all the innovation coins or whatever, the professor coins and all, they've not kept any of their promises, and none of the stuff that they said would come to pass has. So in that sense, I do blame retail, because it's obviously greed that's driving you, and you're hoping to be able to, I don't know, retire or something on some small amount, and they all get swept in it, and you know, you play with fire, you're gonna get burned. Whereas you know, you store in Bitcoin, you store savings in Bitcoin, it does just fine. And people are so greedy, they want like returns higher than Bitcoin. Which,
I guess a subtle disagreement. It's like people are definitely driven by self-interest, and you could, where I would draw the line between self-interest and greed is when you start, you know, violating the life, liberty, and property of another to advance your own self-interest. And I don't know that people understand that, right? They're sort of conditioned by the Wall Street model that, oh, you just get income from things. You know, you buy a thing and it just produces money. So I feel like there's this like layer of economic ignorance that's driving a lot of this. This is why I keep going to this idea of we're awakening from the economic dark ages. Like the fact that we still think we can print money or pass laws, or that politicians can really do anything for an economy. The only thing a politician can do positively for an economy is quit and dismantle the state, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they can't, there's actually nothing that a government can do to advance an economy in any way, because all of the revenues for the government are derived from theft. And theft is detrimental to productivity. So anything a government does is going to be anti-economic.
Well, it can certainly be better for the private sector to do the functions that they generally do. Sometimes it's they're the only ones kind of willing to do it. Like I look at an example like El Salvador, where like they're cleaning up the streets because the gangs were had too much power or something like that. So I can see certain situations where that makes sense. But I mean, all those retail people that don't understand sort of the nature of rent seeking or whatever, there is sort of like an underlying philosophical ignorance about the nature of value creation, or thinking that like rent seeking is okay in many ways. And that's the real ignorance, is that they don't see sort of like being a busybody as something that's bad. They see it as, oh, well, that's just like another way to make money. But that's not how things are, right? Like you got
to produce something.
Yeah, you got to produce something, provide value. And that's what it's like under sound money, where if you are providing value, then you make money, right? But under a fiat money system, it's very easy to get into a rent-seeking position and make money, and it feels like you're providing value because you're making money, but the whole system is subverted because there's a money printer, and ultimately it comes back to the money printer that's able to fund your sort of rent-seeking, and that whole signal that money's supposed to give you, that you are providing something valuable to others, is completely kaput, right? Like it gets cut off, and that's where they are. Can
you define rent seeking? Because it sounds like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are in real estate out there that are like, what do you mean? So I don't think it's not that rents are inherently a bad thing, but rent seeking kind of has its own unique meaning.
And the way I would describe it is getting in the middle of some transaction and extracting value, or extracting a rent, right? Without providing any value. A landlord provides value, right? They're providing the home or whatever.
But being a unnecessary middleman.
Where you're collecting some fee for something. The classic example, and there's a picture I show in some of my talks, is a guy that has a chain over a river, right? And there's a guy coming on a boat, and he lifts up the chain and says, "You can't cross until you pay me."
Yeah.
Now, that person is not providing any value whatsoever, right? It's just sort of extortion in many ways. But there's a lot of that in all sorts of government bureaucracy. Some rubber stamp or some permission or gatekeeping that you have to get around, and in order to go do something that you want. Or it could be like a bilateral transaction, right? I want to sell you something. You collect, we're doing a bilateral transaction, but somebody gets in the middle and says, well, actually, you have to pay us a sales tax now, right? Like, because for whatever reason, they feel entitled to it. And those things are ultimately, friction for the normal market economy, and they don't really provide value to anyone.
Yeah, it's parasitical, right? That, this transaction could flow seamlessly without that middleman. And the devil's in the details, of course, because a lot of these middlemen would argue, sometimes they're connecting the parties, right? Like, I made the introduction between A and B, but it's that, I think the key line is that element of coercion, or the threat of coercion, where it's like, pay me or else. That's when you're violating life, liberty, and property.
And oftentimes it's backed up by the state, right? There are a lot of people in corporate America, right, that have to do a lot of compliance work, and that I would say is somewhat rent seeking, because ultimately, if you don't comply with government regulations, most of which is honestly arbitrary or designed to sort of benefit rent seekers, they you know, it ends up hurting you know, all the other transactions that you're doing as a company and makes the price higher. That's the unfortunate reality of a lot of stuff.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah, again, not to single anyone out that works in compliance, but sort of the dim, grim reality is, your entire occupation is a knock-on effect of government rent seeking, right? That you're actually also, I used to be in tax, and that's what tax accountants do, right? They play that role, and
all taxes are rent seeking in many ways.
And
right?
I think that, I didn't know a lot of tax accountants that love their job either. So there's something related there, right? It's like people tend to hate these jobs naturally. And so, I guess Bitcoiners are just trying to get us to a world where we're doing things we like and we're more productive, and therefore we're all richer, we're all more free, things are more peaceful because we're interdependent rather than kind of in these isolated antagonistic groups.
I would say that that's definitely the case, and the reason why people don't like a lot of these rent-seeking jobs is because I think deep inside they understand that they're not providing value, and like, if you're a human being with even a modicum of conscience, right? Like you want to provide value, you want to be beneficial to other people. But if you're not being that way, right? If you're hurting humanity or whatever, of course you're going to hate it. And like I think about like New York and all the investment bankers and stuff there. They are constantly like drowning themselves in drugs and alcohol and stuff like that, because I think deep down they know too, right? Like they're not providing any value. I mean, if you're like creating a good or service that everyone needs, I don't think you feel the need to do that. But you're working 100-hour weeks, so you can make this trade and make $100 million printed out of thin air because you did a 100x FX trade that like created money for yourself and not really benefit anybody else. I mean, that seems to me good reason to be depressed. Why you need to drown that out.
A key, I would argue the key to fulfillment in life is adding value to the lives of others, right? This is why parenting is so fulfilling, because you're actually doing that all the time. And I don't, investment banking, again, not that it's an inherently bad thing, but in a fiat paradigm, it's pretty bad, right? Like a lot of these deals, as you mentioned, foreign exchange, that's a $5 trillion a day market, which if you multiply that all the way out, it's like something like 12 times the size of global GDP. And it's not doing anything. It's not producing anything. It's just switching from one currency to another. So it's just this parasite basically on the global economy, right? Whatever's actually being produced, the profits that come out of foreign exchange trading are just sucked off the top basically. And so anyone that's involved in that probably does know deep down, wow, I'm getting paid, but I'm not doing anything. I'm not adding any value to the human race. So that creates this dissonance within them.
Yeah. And it makes them depressed, addicted to lots of different things. And, I mean, it's not a good way to go.
No. So I think this is probably a good segue into the book we wanted to talk about today, which is one you've been reading recently. This is Michael Huemer's The Problem of Political Authority, an examination of the right to coerce and the duty to obey, which is critically exploring the moral legitimacy of political authority and the ethical justification for government coercion. So I guess I'll just ask you the question that is motivating this book. This is per the author, I think. Why are governments allowed to do what individuals are not allowed to do? Like a government is the legal monopoly on coercion, compulsion, violence. Individuals are not allowed to coerce, compulse, or act violently toward one another. Why do we allow governments to do this? And then how do we come to a moral justification even for governments being able to do this?
I mean, the short answer is they don't have that, right? But the way it's justified is typically through, social contract theory and so on. But this is what we call political authority. Governments are for some reason allowed to do things that you and I can't do. So, in England, for example, right now, you can get arrested for, saying something online that the government doesn't like. So if you or I did that, somebody says something that we don't like, and trap them in our basement, and keep them there, maybe feed them, but
until they give you some.
that would make us like moral monsters, right? Like especially for saying something that somebody that we don't like. Yeah, government. We give. I'm not sure if we give or they take, but they have, for whatever reason, this right, I guess, or this. They do it, right?
They've arrogated themselves a privilege. It seems like that we don't have
to go and do things that we're not allowed to do, and they sort of use this as a justification for almost any kind of law that they pass. It's we are allowed to do it, and this idea of political authority has grown by leaps and bounds, I think, certainly since like 1971. But even before then, it's something that's been continuously growing for a variety of reasons. But it's this idea that we as government have a right to go do things that more and more violate individuals' rights based on our sense of what justice is. So it could be about misgendering somebody, right? Or, stuff that maybe even 10 years ago was not considered anything close to violating, someone's rights, but is now, right? That sort of arbitrariness, that this power that they have is completely strange, and that's what the book explores, and that's and I think it makes a really good argument that political authority is honestly illegitimate from a natural law perspective. The only way I think you can arrive at political authority being legitimate is if you sort of go down a more Nietzschean path, and they have the power, therefore that's
might makes right.
It's that's just sort of like the de facto reality, and you kind of have to accept it rather than anything based on actual moral reasoning or philosophy.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Rothbard's quote. He says, "To be moral, an act must be free." And so the very introduction of coercion, or the threat of coercion, and if he's correct, automatically makes it an immoral activity, right? The fact that you have to coerce someone to do it. Maybe there's some edge cases, but I struggle to identify them, actually.
There are edge cases, and he does sort of point them out in the book. So, for example, if somebody is going around them murdering, right? Or is like threatening to murder you, the act of self-defense could be considered in some ways coercion, right? Like if you shoot the person.
I guess it's the uninitiated coercion that would be initiated basically by someone else.
So if there's some sort of or even if somebody's going around them murdering, I think there can be, I think morally it's legitimate to go, morally good to go and capture that person, and, provided you take pains to make sure that it is this correct person that did do it, and so on, to, either punish that person in some way, or at least prevent, further murders. I think that's a perfectly reasonable moral thing to be doing. But anything beyond some of these obvious moral cases where the person is violating other people's natural rights, it becomes very much like, okay, you the bar for coercion is very, very high. But it's become very, very low in a fiat economy where it's almost anything is I think there's a statistic, something like the average person commits 3 felonies a day, just according to various there's just so many laws. And I don't think any of those legitimate any the level of coercion that the government sort of claims for itself.
Yeah. Now the Cicero quote comes to mind: "The more laws, the less justice." And you mentioned since 1971, there's been an explosion in, I guess you'd call it fiat regulation, right? These aren't. There's a distinction between the laws that are discovered over time, like these are how humans have resolved conflicts for thousands of years. So we've codified that in English common law. There's a distinction between that type of legality and fiat regulation, where it's just literally a guy in political power signing a sheet of paper and saying, you do this now or else we put you in a box, or we hurt you, or we penalize you somehow. What is the connection there for people that might not be familiar? Why since 1971 has fiat regulation exploded?
Yeah, so part of it is the rent seeking, and the rent seeking class has grown by leaps and bounds. So you can look at any graph of like healthcare administrators, for example, versus physicians. Since 1971, the actual people that do the healing in a healthcare context, like nurses, doctors, and so on, they've grown somewhat, but not by very much. Administrators, paper pushers, the people that are doing bureaucratic rent-seeking stuff exploded, right? It's up like 3,000% since 1971. Yeah. And it's not just healthcare. You can go look at education, like number of professors and people that actually teach or do research versus the administrators, the paper pushers. Again, same thing, right? Like up 3,000% and up. And that's just true of almost every industry because of the presence of fiat money. If you can sort of like collect rents on transactions that you really don't have that much to do with, you're going to
bloat the bureaucracies.
Yeah, and bureaucrats, if they have to sort of justify their job, and generally they're going to create more regulation and sort of assign responsibilities to themselves so they can collect more rents. And that's generally what's happened in all of these places where, they'll identify some problem and say, okay, we're going to put ourselves as in charge of this problem in some way by putting in this regulation or permission or something like that. And those never really go away because, first of all, it's never going to be solved because this bureaucracy already exists, and they're not incentivized to solve the problem because they're in charge of solving that problem. So if it gets solved, then they go away. Homelessness in like San Francisco, for example. I mean, the city funds something like 30 or 40 different organizations to quote unquote solve homelessness.
And it's growing like leaps.
But it keeps growing, right? Like so the regulations and things like that are meant to give these bureaucrats more power, more jobs, and grow this cancerous bureaucracy. And there's no real stop to that because, at least on the monetary side, there's always sort of money printing ultimately that funds these activities. So the regulations, the sort of political authority gets abused more and more as these bureaucracies grow because they have to sort of justify their job and do whatever helps them grow, I guess.
Yeah. It's so crazy because you can almost just like invert whatever the agency, their mission is, right? Is to eliminate homelessness. Well, what are they actually doing? Increasing homelessness. In Bitcoin, we often dream about the idea of forming citadels, which are independent, self-sovereign communities that have their own energy, food, and water resources. Today, that dream is becoming a reality at the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a 705-acre regenerative agriculture community located at the Florida-Georgia line near Folkston, Georgia. The farm is known as the healthiest place on earth, and it includes orchards, organic standing gardens, regenerative animal pastures, berry fields, and much, much more. Today, the farm features 25 custom-built cabins and has plans to construct 225 more in the years ahead. The farm has its own food, energy, and water sources and is completely off-grid. So if you're looking to join a citadel community comprised of sovereign individuals, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about membership. make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on custom cabin pricing. Again, that's okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. All right, so part 1 of this book is the illusion of authority. And I'll just name the first 3 chapters, and you can kind of take this whatever direction you want. Well, yeah, I'll name the first 3, and then there's more behind this. There's the reasons why people believe in political authority. I think the author goes into like the psychological biases and status quo biases. There's the old social contract theory, which was introduced by Rousseau, which we still haven't shaken off. I don't know where's the contract, who signed it, when do we get to renegotiate? Like, it's just, it doesn't make any sense. And then there's the democratic authority argument, which is something like, tyranny of the majority is okay somehow. How would you, or how does the author dismantle some of these arguments that justify what he calls the illusion of authority?
Yeah, so let's start with social contract theory, because that's the theory that we all sort of have a social contract between the government and us, and we gave them that authority. But of course, there's no explicit agreement. There's no, like, when you become a citizen, you don't sign a piece of paper saying, hey, like, I agree that the government can coerce and do all these things. And if you look at things from the perspective of natural law, which I think is really the only legitimate way to morally justify anything, then they don't have such an authority, because there's no agreement. And the author goes through what a normal agreement looks like, what a normal contract looks like. Among other things, both parties have some obligation to the other. But if the government doesn't protect you from looters or something like that, then that doesn't it doesn't automatically mean that you don't have to pay your taxes or something, right? Like that's like. Which would be the case in any normal contract, right? If
they don't perform,
if they don't perform like some duty, if they don't collect your garbage, for example, you shouldn't have, like, that would be the case in like a normal, like, if you're the waste management firm for my neighborhood and you don't collect the garbage, I have no obligation to pay you. But with government, it's not like that at all. Whatever you do, you have to pay your taxes. Even if they don't fulfill any of the things that they're supposed to fulfill on your behalf. So that dual obligation aspect definitely, I think, nullifies this social contract theory. But there are lots of other reasons, including the fact that you can't really opt out of it, right? Or
Right.
you can't
It's not a
say,
contract.
hey, I don't want to be a part of this. You're kind of coerced into the authoritarian structure that you know that they say you have. So I don't think social contract theory holds any water, and the author gets into why so many people seem to be carrying water for the regime, and you know part of that is some of the psychological biases that we have. But we could kind of see it already, right? Like even in politics today, there are people that will justify almost anything that the regime does, and part of it might be that they're getting paid directly by the government in some way, shape, or form. But mostly it's because they don't want to believe that they have to go and do stuff that puts them in danger or something to that effect. I think it was our friend Peter St. Onge who wrote about how, you know, why is it that women and sort of like weak men end up supporting the Democrats? And his argument was that actually it's more important for people with less agency or people that feel vulnerable or feel like they're unsafe to more be in the right group than to pursue truth. And that seems to definitely be the case here with, you know, supporting the regime. There are a lot of people that will sort of like do all kinds of mental gymnastics to justify that. And this is kind of like, it honestly reminds me a lot of Keynesian economics, where people will come up with just like the stupidest theories, but as long as they support the people in power,
the money printer,
they'll just sort of propagate it as if it's truth.
Yes,
and you get a lot of people whose brains are completely twisted and sort of kind of go crazy because if you lie too much, you just you can't
You're
sort
out
of
of
live
touch
with
with
yourself.
reality.
You go crazy.
How much does memetics play in this, do you think? Because one of the things that I see is, capture money printer or capture political authority, use political authority and or money printer to, I don't use the word hire, I guess, you know, people of influence, whether these are cultural figures, athletes, actors, whatever it may be, to be pro money printer and political authority. And then the masses just unconsciously imitate these cultural leaders. And so that's like a very vicious cycle, because then you get more power, more money printer, and then you can just wash, rinse, repeat. How much do you think that plays into this propagation of the illusion that we need political authority to have order in our lives?
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. And I mean, just in general, there is that mimetic force of, you know, desiring something that other people that you see as high status. And the entire status game, I think, is influenced significantly by fiat money. So to be an investment banker in today's economy is very prestigious, and a lot of rent-seeking positions actually end up that way, even though they're not very fulfilling. The people in them are very sad, and they're constantly like depressed and trying to.
But they're well paid.
Yeah, they're very well paid, right? And those, but that sort of like status hierarchy is what causes that mimetic contagion, right? So if you are at the top of the status ladder, well, a lot of people seek to imitate you, even if it's like almost satanic. Some of that stuff is just like you hear about like what Diddy's doing and all that, and it's just like, okay, people imitate like what is clearly evil, almost even just to kind of get into that. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of the apologetics for the regime, if you will, happen, because that's in a way a way to increase your status within this fiat system. And you know, it's not a surprise to me that most of the Bitcoin community is sort of outside that status hierarchy in many ways, or have rejected at least some parts of it. And that's the commonality I find is, okay, if you are still bought into that game, you have zero interest, because you're probably fairly high up on the status ladder. you would much rather continue that and like support the regime rather than, you know, go onto this new status ladder, or I mean, I guess a community, a more positive sum game or whatever in the Bitcoin community.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it's an underappreciated connection between the economic paradigm and what people are doing, right? Because if you can, you know, if you can make a good living stealing, you know, a la, I always pick on Putin, but, you know, insert whatever statesman you want here. Putin has his $200 billion net worth or whatever it is, all from stealing. Well, a lot of guys are going to imitate that. Like, well, he did it and he's at the top of the heap. Well, I think I'll do it too. But if you go into a world where the stealing is not so profitable and you can't have a $200 billion net worth statesman, or you could put a Nancy Pelosi in here, right? Where she makes,
or Mitch McConnell or whoever.
She makes a few $100,000 a year, but her net worth is, I don't even know,
$200 million.
$200 million. People are going to imitate that. But if you're in a world where the stealing is not profitable or less possible, let's say, well, then people are going to imitate productive strategies for creating wealth. So there seems to be this connection between like the economic paradigm and what is being culturally propagated via imitation that is, I mean, I scarcely can understand this, but it seems like there's a deep connection
there is. But I would say that within the fiat economy, money and status have become very, very closely linked, right? Where to the point where somebody like Warren Buffett, who is, you know, who hasn't built or created any goods or services, he's just sort of like push money around, but he's like super well respected, right? He's very high on the status ladder. Which at least traditionally wasn't the case. So like you look at biblical times, you know, some of the most despised people were tax collectors and prostitutes. And if you look at that time period, prostitutes probably made a lot of money just because it was just so rare for people to do that. So the price on prostitution would go up because there's less supply and there's a lot of demand and so on. Similar with tax collectors, but they didn't have very high status, right? And this is one of the things in the Bible that you learn is that, you know, money and status weren't necessarily correlated at that time, in large part because, you know, tax collectors, they were seen as like completely rent-seeking, and they definitely were. They just collected more tax than they needed to, and they used that as profit. So there are times and places where the status hierarchy depends on something other than money. But in a fiat economy, especially sort of with the breakdown of morality and sort of like that move away from natural law, it's become sort of almost the only measure that people are willing to sort of notice. And in that way, it becomes even worse because now it's you can justify almost anything as long as you make money. I made bank, so who cares, right? Like it becomes it's horrible.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, and at least in a sound money world, even the rich are going to be people that have rendered the most useful work or favors to society. So it's like the status is somewhat warranted to the degree they do get status for being rich. It's like, well, okay, you solved a lot of problems for people. Like maybe you do deserve high status, and we want people to imitate you. You know, successful entrepreneur guy, but we don't want people to imitate the coercive political authority figures, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of them, and people imitate them like to a crazy degree. Which I mean, in a sense, I suspect that Diddy was imitating somebody, right? Like, it was
his handlers, probably.
Yeah, and a lot of people in politics that sort of like they seem to want to create these weird cults of personality around themselves and so on to gain power. They're almost imitating like Kim Jong-un or something. It's really weird that way. But that's the path of nihilism. That's the path
which gets back to the crypto shitcoinery, because a lot of those are little money cults too, right? Kim Jong-un. So the other this is the titles of chapters 3 and 4, which is still under part 1, the illusion of authority. The author mentions the consequentialist justifications for political authority. And then he also names political authority as a moral illusion. the consequentialist is something like, well, government coercion's okay because we get good outcomes, something like that. And then the moral illusion, I think he draws parallels to slavery to say, well, there was a point in time where slavery was normalized and everyone just thought it was fine because everyone's doing it. Clearly it's not. It's one thing to be widespread. It's another thing to be morally just. So what would you say about those two domains, consequentialist justifications and political authority as moral illusion?
Yeah, consequentialism, I think, is morally bankrupt. I think it's very much like utilitarianism, do the most good for most people or something like that. But then, you can look at the trolley dilemma or whatever, and okay, is it okay now to go harvest the organs of a completely healthy person so you can make 5 people live? And
exactly,
and stuff like that gets weird real quick. So I don't put any stock in that, and I don't think anyone should from a philosophical standpoint. But that is the justification, once again, by the people that are trying to rationalize things at any level, right? And like you were saying, this happens in the altcoin space all the time. Oh yeah, those people are great because they're making my investment go up. Therefore, I will give whatever justification that they need, and it's a deep moral corruption when you have bags, if you will, and that's the dynamic at play. If you have something tied, if your status is tied to a particular belief, then you're going to support that belief with whatever rationalization you can. And we see this in politics all the time where people will justify whatever their party is doing, right? In whatever way, and they will use the dirtiest, stupidest rhetoric or like not really even arguments, because most of these things are ultimately just based on your feelings and sort of emotional manipulation much more than they are intellectual arguments, rationales. Although, I mean, obviously there are people that try, but like they don't hold any water, and you can almost feel it when you read the stuff, because there's just sort of like a deep dishonesty in all of them, and they kind of know it, right? And I've seen this with atheists too, right? They'll make arguments almost for the sake of making the argument, not because they believe it, but because they just want to sort of undermine you or something, or hey, here, checkmate Maxis or whatever, right? Like it's not intellectually honest, and I really hate that about like a lot of the discourse, because so much of it is scoring points for your side or something, not necessarily
it's
about
not aimed
the
at truth.
Yeah, it's not. It's about popularity.
Yeah,
which happens in democracy significantly.
Yeah, it is frustrating that, because you do need to have, relatively extreme humility if you're going to engage in actual discourse, right? But the presumption has to be there's something from this conversation that I can learn, or something from this person that I can learn that I don't yet know. But if you forego that presumption, then you're just in this other game where it's like, how do I go up the status ladder of the and it tends to be the ad hominem attacks, the you're appealing to, making emotional appeals to the audience rather than logical appeals, and I would argue that's what these presidential debates are now, right? There's not even any logic at all going between them, like zero. I don't think there's one single logical appeal being made. It's just emotional hype.
Yeah, and it's sad because that is how most people actually get arguments and things, is through rhetoric. And I think it was Aristotle who said that very very few people are convinced by dialectic. They're way more convinced by rhetoric, and it's not even like an IQ test per se. It's once again, I think it's more of a virtue test, because it's much more about how honest are you with the actual argument, and what are you convinced by, like being in the in group or the truth. And for a lot of people, it's all about being in the in group. And you could be Republican, you could be Democrat, you could be whatever. And once again, going back to what Peter St. Onge said, like there is this desire to be in the in group if your primary priority is safety.
Yeah.
Where
Safety
so
in
like
numbers.
people that sort of feel secure, that have some level of agency or believe in their own agency, tend to pursue truth way more.
Right.
Which is why I think, you have amongst Bitcoiners a lot more of that than like
a lot of
general public.
disagreeableness too.
Yeah.
People that aren't afraid to stand apart from the crowd and say you're all wrong.
Yeah.
Like I'm standing on a principle, which is it's not about your opinion so much. And that's almost a prerequisite to get into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because Bitcoin is this fringe thing still. That's interesting. Okay, so then part 2 of the book, so he sort of dismantles or at least penetrates the illusion of political authority, helps us see through the veil, so to speak. Then the author goes into alternatives to political authority. And this is where, I found in my own conversations with people, it's a lot of people can penetrate the veil, actually. They're like, yeah, things are really messed up and it's not ideal. But then the alternatives part is where the conversation gets tricky, because you're like, when you start proposing these things, they're like, oh, that would never work. Who's going to build the roads? All these tropes. And it's something, I think it comes down to that status quo bias, where it's just like whatever is just preferable to what we don't know, the seen versus the unseen, something like that. So the first chapter in part 2 of the book is titled Anarchism and Free Market. Obviously this is he's introducing anarcho-capitalism here. The idea of private law, defense agencies, market mechanisms for governance rather than just this top-down coercive structure. How do you introduce these ideas to people that aren't familiar with them? Because it's the challenge is like there's nowhere to really point, right? We don't have anywhere to point. Like, look, here's how they do it over here. There's examples in history and whatnot, but in modern fiat world, there's just not a lot of things to point to.
Well, I mean, at least with stuff like police protection and stuff like that, the businesses that survived during like the BLM riots, private security guards. Right? You have private security guards. Yeah. Your business was fine, but you depended on the police, not so much. And this is where I think introducing market forces is generally a good thing. And people don't necessarily believe that. They partly because of the status quo bias, but also because there's a security in thinking that your current system is good enough, right? Or you don't want to experiment with things that might upset the apple cart and make you have to adjust things too much. So in a sense, I think a lot of people are just kind of lazy or slothful or something. They don't want to transition to new systems, and they're afraid of it. They fear it in some way because now they have to learn something new. Oh my God, I have to. I have responsibility again, or whatever. So there's certainly a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, introducing them to that is not easy, and it does require, I think, a deep intellectual humility, which most people don't have or don't want to have, because they'd rather just sort of keep going with that what they have, because they're kind of comfortable already. And this is where societal change almost always happens when enough people are uncomfortable, right? Like, and things get so bad that they say, oh, well, like we have to do something different now because we can't even put bread on our dinner tables or whatever. That it's at that point, and it takes, people can take a lot, and it takes up until a certain threshold before people are willing to upend the current system. And I mean, in a sense, I suppose that's good, because then we're not having civil war and revolution, and I mean those things are absolutely horrid. As bad as things have been the last 4 years, I think it pales in comparison to like the evil of a civil war.
Of course,
yeah.
There's this. Well, again, status quo bias, or you could call it like a homeostasis in a way, where like people just try to, this is sort of working until it's just so unbelievably painful. Typically, as you said, when the food stops flowing, right? Or people cannot make ends meet in one way or another. That's when well, the social fabric bursts, right? Something has to change because people literally aren't getting the energy they need in form of food or whatever it is. Do you want to give your kids a foundation of freedom and understanding of Bitcoin and a healthy skepticism of government? Then you should try Tuttle Twins. It's a cartoon about a grandma with a time-traveling wheelchair who takes her grandkids on hilarious adventures to learn about economics and freedom. Think the education of Magic School Bus meets the comedy of The Simpsons. With Tuttle Twins, your kids can learn about Bitcoin from Satoshi Nakamoto, civil disobedience from Harriet Tubman, natural rights from John Locke, and how to destroy the economy from Karl Marx. Today, Hollywood greenlights a lot of woke content or mindless garbage. Each episode of Tuttle Twins is parent-funded, parent-vetted, and only released when it's parent-approved. Because Tuttle Twins is fan-funded, it was the world's first kids show to teach about Bitcoin. That episode alone has been seen over 40 million times and was tweeted about by Michael Saylor. You can watch episodes of Tuttle Twins for free right now. And if you like what you see, you can use code BREEDLOVE for 10% off a subscription to the Angel Studios app and watch all of the episodes. So go to angel.com/breedlove to discover Tuttle Twins today. And remember to use code BREEDLOVE for 10% off. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Kalshi is the first legal prediction market in which you can bet on the outcome of any future event that you're interested in, such as the US presidential election, inflation rates, or when the next version of ChatGPT will be released. Let's say you think Trump will win the US presidential election, and let's say the market is pricing his odds of winning at 50%. So you can then buy 100 shares of a Trump victory at 50 cents each, so that would be $50 for 100 shares. And if you're right, you will get $100 back and double your money, but you could also sell early. If Trump's odds of winning went up to, say, 70%, you could sell for 70 cents each and lock in a $20 profit. And even if you don't want to trade, you can go and just watch the live odds to see who is more likely to win the race. And Kalshi has hundreds of markets just like this for you to go and play in. So go to kalshi.com/breedlove today to start playing in this predictions market. The first 500 traders who deposit $50 will get a free $20 credit. Again, that is kalshi.com, kalshi.com/breedlove. Before starting the What is Money show, I spent most of my career as a CFO, overseeing internal technology implementations and business acquisitions. Over the next 10 years, it is projected that over 12 million businesses in the US will be sold. If you are an operator running a business generating between $5 and $200 million of revenue, and you're considering selling your business within the next decade, then there is a significant opportunity for you to deploy technology to streamline business processes, reduce operating costs, and enhance the multiple your business ultimately sells for. To this end, I am partnering with the team at Emerge Dynamics, a firm with decades of experience in maximizing the value of privately held small and middle market businesses. Go to emergedynamics.com/breedlove to learn how you can build an attractive, high multiple company that maximizes your return when you fully exit. Again, that's emergedynamics.com/breedlove. Anarcho-capitalism. and the word anarchy even has this very specifically anarchy has a very specific negative connotation around it. You know, this is what most political rhetoricians would say. Like, if we don't do this, pass this law or print this money, things will descend into anarchy.
Yeah.
And like, it's just synonymous with chaos and uncontrolled violence, I guess. But the word anarchy just means no anarchon, no ruler, right? It doesn't mean no rules. So even, you know, early US in many ways was anarchic, right? That we, you know, you basically have these rule structures, but people opt into them or they opt out of them if they don't work for them. And that's kind of how that works. How do you dissect that idea? The idea of anarcho-capitalism, again, given that we can't see it anywhere in the world, and a lot of people don't seem capable of getting to that level of abstraction or vision, perhaps, how can we ever hope to invite the, you know, masses into an anarcho-capitalistic future if they can't even fathom it and there's nothing to point to?
Yeah, I would first of all rebrand anarcho-capitalism to decentralized capitalism, because I think that has better connotations. And if we're talking about rhetoric, well, you know, anarchy is rhetorically pretty terrible, right? Like it's got too many bad connotations associated with it. Decentralized capitalism seems to me the better branding. And I would say that, you know, we've seen how it works in Bitcoin. And that's, I think, something very positive, where you don't have a central Vitalik Buterin or Charles Hodgkinson telling other people, here's the roadmap we're going to do. And of course, they've all been disasters, and they don't keep their promises, and they end up doing, you know, kind of self-serving things and so on. Whereas, you know, in Bitcoin, you have entire companies that are creating things off of off of Bitcoin. They're not rent seeking or being subsidized by some central foundation and so on. And it keeps developing, right? Like we just had like an ARC transaction on mainnet, and they're able to do that without any softworks or whatever. And that like that sort of like permissionless innovation, it shouldn't be called anarchy per se. It's decentralized, and it works great. It sort of allows the brilliance and genius of each individual to like sort of come to pass. So so instead of sort of defining ourselves as defining this alternate system as a negative thing, right? Like without rulers or something like that. Instead, let's make a more positive vision, right? Like where each person is sort of self-sovereign and they are able to contribute value in a way without having to get the permission of others and provide value. And I think it allows for a lot more bilateral transactions where you're providing value either in goods or services to other people. And you know, this is where entrepreneurs can come in and figure out different ways of doing things, and you get market competition, and you converge on really innovative, interesting, and effective solutions very quickly instead of sort of central, top-down, ruler-based systems where instead of discovering good systems, right, or good solutions, you have sort of, we think this might work, let's just see what happens, and then a lot of people suffer in the meantime. And they might not ever converge to the solution because they're rent seekers around the current system, and they don't want to offset the Apple Card and so on. And this happens in fiat money all the time. That sort of vision should be maybe called like centralized capitalism or something like that. Or it has all sorts of vulnerabilities and cancerous growth and so on. I think decentralized capitalism could definitely be something that maybe people would sign on to. And because we have this example in Bitcoin, and we can see how it's worked, maybe that's impetus to try a little bit more and sort of slowly extend from there.
Bitcoin is the most purely capitalistic or decentralized capitalistic thing we've ever done, basically. prior to that, I guess, is the internet. Prior to that, I guess, is like the U.S. constitutional republic. So when it's been growing by leaps and bounds, but then you also have the point of comparison. It's also a good way to dismantle the shit more argument. Like centralized capitalism, even though it's more like socialism in a way. I mean, not necessarily. They're not really violating a property, I guess. They're just
it's more authoritarian, right? They've sort of assigned themselves a political authority over the protocol, and that's ultimately what they've done. Is, hey, we're gonna make the system this way, and y'all can't do anything about it. And I don't know why anyone would sign on for that, especially given their track record, but that seems to be the case.
Yeah, the only marginal, I guess, improvement over traditional fiat will be you can opt out more easily than you can of fiat system. That's a great idea. I also thought, instead of calling it, fascism, communism, democracy, statism, like, well, let's just call it coercivism. It's like you need uninitiated coercion to get it to work, whichever model you're running at. And so that would awaken people a little more to the reality of what this thing is. Because then you get these silly arguments where you're like, oh no, it's fascism. Oh no, it's communism. That's not also I should have. It's like, guys, there's a common denominator between all these things.
And no matter which one you're arguing for or against, you're arguing for or against uninitiated, legalized, institutionalized coercion. And that is a problem, right? Because then you run into the moral argument in a way that just, there's no way around it, right? It's never going to be moral, no matter which way you spin it. Because you're saying we need to bludgeon these people over the head to get them to do what the plan says.
And for a long time, that was called tyranny. Right?
Yes, exactly.
And there was sort of like this line between tyranny and non-tyranny, and natural rights. If you respect natural rights, it wasn't tyranny. If you did, then it wasn't tyranny. And that was how it was separated. But this idea of natural rights has not been very popular more recently, largely because I think the powers that be, the elites, the regime or whatever, they've sort of like played down this idea of tyranny and like sort of rebranded it and called it just sort of directing the economy or something that. Or sort of guiding things,
public-private partnerships.
Sort of like give you this image of them being like Moses, like leading them out of the or something like that. But in reality, it's actually tyranny, and I think that we should probably call it that because that's what coercion is. It's tyranny.
Yeah, no, bingo. And then also, while they've sort of softened that side of the field, they've also co-opted, libertarianism has now become a political party. It's like, wait a minute, that's not what that was supposed to be. So yeah, it is funny how it's just a language game. It creates, we're battling for what did Ayn Rand said something about philosophy? Like you're battling for the mind of man in a way, but it's not. Battle's kind of a bad metaphor because you're not trying to storm someone's mind and take it. It's like you're inviting them in with logic and rational argumentation. And so, I guess the statists just can't win on that terrain. So they always try to devolve the conflict into the domain of emotional, whatever you call that, emotional
rhetoric. I mean, right? It's and their weapons are mostly propaganda in that score, and it's unfortunate because I think Aristotle identified that most people are convinced by rhetoric. So in a democracy, you're almost always going to see rhetoric dominate, just because that's how most people are wired. It's actually very uncommon for people to be devoted to dialectic and actually. Be argued into things. Although many people have the conceit that they are one of those people, and then you see actually how they argue or how they, what appeals that they make, and you clearly see that they're rhetoricians.
I think we're all at least part of it. Like we're all driven by emotions, of course, but you need the logical part of yourself to balance out some of that. Like if you just ran around making decisions on emotion all the time, your life would be a disaster, right? You need to take a step back, reflect, plan for yourself.
Well, I think a human is like most happy or most sort of have inner peace if your rhetoric and dialectic are aligned.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So
Heart, mind, resonance.
yeah, and but that takes a lot because the inner self can't necessarily be conformed to the rhetoric that you're spouting. It has to come from truth.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Right.
that dialectic and rhetoric alignment is actually quite difficult unless you let the dialectic take the lead. If you let the rhetoric take the lead, then you get into a lot of rationalization, mental gymnastics, things like that. And unfortunately, that's where most people are because they value safety so much, or they value being in the in group so much, and they're this I think also is part of why so many people are so anxious today, because if the threat of being in the out group is always sort of ever present, of course you're going to be anxious because what if I get canceled? What if I and that's an unfortunate reality that most people are just deathly afraid of in a fiat economy, because if you are cut off from the in group and you have like a job at an investment bank, or any fiat job, you could very much get canceled. And now what do you have? What I don't know. Like I don't have anything. Oh, what am I gonna do? And that's a very like unfortunate place to be. And I get why people are like that, but it's part of democracy, part of sort of the system that we have set up, that people are so influenced by rhetoric. So that's what gets played to. If we had a different system, maybe one that's more based on a ruling elite or something, maybe it would be a little more dialectical. I don't know. And that's not to say that it's necessarily better. But like the current system that we have is largely based on rhetoric, just because that's how most people are wired.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And then the rhetoric is self-deception in a way, right? It's either you're buying into someone else's rhetoric, which is deceptive by definition, or you can also deceive yourself. And that is, Vervaeke often says self-deception is like the opposite of wisdom in a way, right? Like wisdom is seeing your own self-deception and overcoming self-deception. It's one major component of it. I had Robert Grant on the show recently, and he said, when you learn to feel with the mind and think with the heart, the river of wisdom flows. Okay. So when you get resonance between these two things, you can actually overcome the self-deception and make good decisions. That feels about right. It's like it's not purely computational, rational. It's like there's also the human component. That's where the moral and the ethical lives. It's like it's in the heart, right?
Yeah. I mean, there is a definite utility to rhetoric, and it's to reinforce the dialectic. And this is what I think Christianity would call faith, right? It's if you believe something, using the rhetorical devices and things to strengthen what you already believe is a virtuous thing, right? Like it helps you do that stuff. Like, one of the rhetorical devices that the state uses, for example, is the flag, right? Like, and for patriotism and stuff like that, it's supposed to reinforce this other thing that you believe in the country that you're a part of, and the flag is a symbol. It's a rhetorical device to help you strengthen the thing that you've hopefully determined through dialectic. And that's what it's for. And this is why I like memes and stuff within Bitcoin, not your keys, not your coins, stuff like that. It's a way to reinforce at an emotional level what you believe at sort of like an intellectual level. And that combination is very powerful. If you can sort of like meme yourself into having good habits, for example, that's wonderful. I think that's awesome. But the wrong way to use it is to make you believe something that is wrong or false or lies or whatever justifies your own sin or wrongdoing or fraud or whatever. And that's where I think it goes wrong.
You must have, like, when you look through the rhetorical device or the symbol or the icon, that needs to have firm intellectual footing and truth. And then the device is sort of almost like a memory device or reinforcing the emotional involvement with it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But the state puts the cart before the horse, right? They just push out the this is what defines propaganda, maybe, is like it's all that symbology, but there's no truth underneath it.
Yeah. And it's really tricky with propaganda because it's so close to the truth, right?
Yeah,
and like the best propaganda, they don't say any lies. They just tell you the truth that they want you to know, and they don't give you any of the other side.
Yeah.
And that it's a way of manipulation, the sort of like at an emotional level, so that you're turned away from what you already believe, which is why like so much of propaganda is so dangerous. And I don't understand like the people that are, you know, they like a lot of libertarians, for example, they'll say, oh, you know, I read the New York Times to know what the opposite side is thinking. But you're also exposing yourself to a lot of freaking propaganda. And if you think you're immune from propaganda, you probably don't understand how propaganda works. Because it works at like sort of like this base emotional level. And if you're not careful about the propaganda that you're consuming, like you will get influence. And I've seen a lot of people, supposedly libertarian, that like veer left as a result of that, right? They get influenced by propaganda so much, and maybe there is some level of fear in them of, oh, maybe I should be with this group because you know that's more secure, or you know they sort of act like they're outside it, but they're really in it, and so on. And it becomes this intellectually dishonest game that they end up playing to sort of justify why they want to be in this in group, and you can see the mental gymnastics when they talk, and it's actually quite horrible. But this is why it's. Like, I don't agree with the assessment, oh, we should hear from all sides and blah, blah, blah. No, you don't understand how vulnerable you are and how big your attack surface is when it comes to rhetoric, because there are so many ways to like sort of get past your intellectual guard, right?
Yeah,
and
that's what it is.
Like get underneath and dig under this wall that you have, or go over the wall that you have, and
undermine. That's what undermine actually means. To dig beneath the wall and compromise its fortifications. And so you're compromising the intellectual fortifications through this undermine. The archetypal example that comes to mind is from each according to their ability to each according to their need. My heart loves it. It's like, oh, that sounds great. You know, like that sounds very peaceful, and everyone will be taken care of, and we don't have to fight about anything, and it's all done. But then as soon as your intellect looks at it, it's like, hold up. Who's determining whose ability? How are we motivating those of ability to serve those with need? Who's quantifying need? Like, who's arbitrating all of this? You know, it's very squishy. And so it doesn't hold up to intellectual.
And this is how rhetoric works, is that almost always it's like exactly that example. It sounds really good. But the frame by which it comes through, like sort of like
it's a frame problem.
They smuggle in all of these like assumptions about how things are going to be in order to make that thing true, including stuff like who determines this, that, or whatever. And that's what you have to, if you understand propaganda, that's the first place you would look, is how are they framing this phrase, right? Like what are the sort of like intellectual assumptions that are being smuggled in with this feel good thing or feel bad thing that I have to be very wary of. And, you know, this is the hard work of, sort of parsing what people are saying is, okay, they have certain assumptions on the statement, and what are these assumptions, and are they intellectually true? And that is very, very hard, right? Like it takes so much work to go through each statement. And if you are willing to do that, by all means, go and read the New York Times. And if you can do that for each statement, and you can honestly and intellectually understand where it's coming from, and you can dissent. I give props to people that can do that, but it is just incredibly hard.
I don't think it's possible. It's like diet, right? If you're eating whatever Sour Patch Kids every day, like it's gonna get in your metabolism and gunk you up. You can't like out rationalize it. It's the same thing with a diet of information. All right, so getting back to the book here, we're still in part 2, which is the alternatives to political authority. Author in chapter 7 goes into public goods and market failures. talking about the free rider problem, which is often cited as it pertains to public goods. And then I'll mix in chapter 8 here too, just in the interest of time, which is titled Security Without the State. I still have not found actually what I consider to be a compelling example of a market failure in the real world. I've heard a lot of really smart arguments from, I would say the most intelligent ones I've heard are from people like Eric Weinstein. He cited the example of the nuclear weapon in a backpack, that's a market failure. But I was like, well, actually, doesn't the state produce nuclear weapons? I don't think the market ever produced that. So, what can we say about, I guess, public goods? Are market failures even real? And then how, this is probably people's number one concern and number one counter argument to what we're calling decentralized capitalism, or is more traditionally called anarcho-capitalism, that without the state, if it's not who's going to build the roads, it's how are we going to protect the borders? How are we going to defend ourselves? How are we going to have security? So what can we say about these points?
Yeah. So first question about public goods, and we discussed this, I think, maybe 2 times ago when I was on the show about when we were discussing Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed. Like, the idea of public property is itself an anathema, right? And of course, you're going to have weird free rider problems because we all own it, but we don't.
Exactly.
And we can use it, but we can't.
Get the rights, but we don't have the responsibilities.
It's a very, very strange idea. At least with a monarchy, you get somebody that owns it, and therefore they have this sort of incentive to go and take care of it and do something with it. And
to cite Aristotle, sorry to interrupt one more time, I think he said, when everyone owns everything, no one takes care of anything.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the problem of free ridership or whatever. It's this weird thing, property. I think you pointed out last time or 2 times ago that, it comes from Latin prope, which is, one's own, right? Like it's property. And to say that it's public one's own, well, that it doesn't make any sense. It's actually an oxymoron, public property. So you get rid of those problems just by having people own things. And I think that also goes to stuff like border security and things like that. If you're responsible for the security of your own place, and this is something that Hoppe points out in his book as well, then you don't have stuff like immigration problems or whatever. You can bring in whoever you want to your own property, which that's part of property rights. But you're also responsible if they incur damage on other people's property or whatever. And at that point, you'd be very much more careful because of the liability of who you invite in. If it's your mom or whatever, that's fine. But some military age dude from China or something. No, you're probably gonna be like, okay, maybe not. Especially if you don't know who they are or whatever. So there are natural ways in which this all can kind of be resolved. And the main thing about security is I don't think the current security regime that we have in the United States is at all efficient, right? And it's and we're starting to doubt whether or not they even have the right capabilities, because in many ways the technology that the U.S. Military is based on is from, say, 40 years ago. And we have Houthis can use a drone to take out entire warships. That tells you like something is horribly off about like the supposed defense that we have. So I think private security would do a lot better job. It'd be a lot more efficient, a lot more affordable. Something like if you look at the U.S. budget and all the veterans benefits and all this other stuff, it actually takes up a very significant chunk of the national budget. Is that really like worthwhile, or is it efficient, or is that something that we should pay for at that level? I really don't think so. And I think in a decentralized capitalist society, we would find out very quickly that a lot of that is just overkill, and there's probably significant amounts of rent seekers that are, benefiting hugely at probably orders of magnitude more cost than it needs to be.
What about market failures? Do you buy into those at all, or do you...
I don't. I like you were saying. I haven't seen any market failures that weren't like caused by government or something like that. It's almost always like government failure or something like that, and not market failure.
Yes.
Like I don't even know what that would mean. Like the market rejects something that somebody thinks that is useful.
That's the market.
Yeah.
Working. I mean, that would be an expression of they don't actually think it's useful.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's almost a definitional thing, because if a market is just where consensual actors exchange things, it's like, well, if they don't want it, then it's not going to manifest. If they do want it, it will manifest. So how can a market fail?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess trying to steelman it. Maybe the thought is that it violates some natural law in some way. The market violates somebody's rights. But I kind of struggle to think of one where somehow someone's rights are being violated in a normal functioning market.
It almost suspends the definition of market once someone's rights are violated.
Yeah.
Because the market is the free consensual exchange respecting both participants' rights in every transaction.
Yeah.
Once you violate someone's rights, like, well, it's no longer a market.
Yeah, there's some coairsion involved by somebody, and it's like, well, why is that a market failure? Isn't that like, failure maybe to punish the coercion, possibly? I mean, I could maybe see that where people are, I don't know, forced to do something that they would not rather do by a market participant, but in that way they're violating rights, and maybe they think that some other entity needs to punish those people. But
I think we're both struggling with this one. So if anyone's listening, please let us know. I would love to challenge my own thinking on this, but I years of thinking about it, reading about it, talking to people about it. I've yet to find one that's convincing to me.
Yeah.
Chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9, the moral cost of government. This is a very big one. I think this might be maybe the climax of the book in some ways, where you really getting into the moral cost of government, and then talking about utopianism versus realism. Again, the argument that's often wielded against what we're calling decentralized capitalism is that it's just a utopian thing. They even make fun of, what do they call on Twitter? They call them LOL. Lolbertarians.
Yeah.
It's like, that would just never work. Ha 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 ha. And it's like, what kind of mentality is that? It's like, if you just say that about everything, we're never going to progress to anything.
Yeah, I mean, and that's again sort of like a rhetorical device. Right?
Yes.
It's to make it look ridiculous, as if like no right-thinking person would ever consider this or something like that, and that's unfortunately very effective, especially if you're concerned about in-group out-group. Then you're called a libertarian. Mockery is
you don't want to get laughed at.
Extremely effective at keeping you in the in-group. But the utopianism versus realism argument, it's like, that's not realistic. Like, nothing looks realistic, especially if you have a significant status quo bias. It's like, can't really imagine things going any other way. So therefore you don't, you sort of dismiss it out of hand. But again, like, things tend to happen in such a way that when enough people are suffering enough, then they're like, okay, well, whatever this alternative is, it has to be better than what I'm experiencing now. And at that point, it's like, okay, all right, we'll try this then. But the main, I think, all moral implications are that you get a lot of people that are sort of abdicating their own responsibility in many ways, and they sort of let the state get away with way too much, and sort of suffer and allow their own suffering and the suffering of others. I mean, the fact that we had like a couple of $1 trillion wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and just like added so much devastation and misery to
the world.
Millions of people, right? Millions and millions of people that are either dead now or in horrible situations as a result of that. And like we kind of wash our hands morally of it, rather than think about like I think the collective responsibility that we have in sort of supporting the political authority, right? Like saying that this is a legitimate thing that they're allowed to do. I think reflects on the people that allowed it to happen, which I would say at some level is the voters, right? Like, and it gives us responsibility to some degree morally for that outcome.
No, it's so true. And this one is very, I've thought about this a lot actually. And like, even if you don't vote and you just hold some savings in US dollars, well, the war on terror was paid for entirely by printed money. So if you were holding dollar balances at that time, it was your purchasing power that was getting stolen to go and wage the, I don't even call them wars, by the way. They're just imperialistic campaigns, right? They're just mechanized mass murder campaigns waged by the US government against smaller states. Basically, it's gang warfare at scale. You then, even if you don't understand that your dollar savings were being pilfered by the US government through inflation to fund that murder campaign, you're still kind of complicit in an economic way. So it's like, it gets it makes me appreciate the complexity of the world when I think about it that way. It's like, we do need to draw these bright lines, but man, it's complicated, right? And a lot of people they just flat out don't understand inflation. So it's like, you can forget about them understanding the rest of this. But the people like Bitcoiners that do understand inflation and maybe they hold dollar balances still somewhere, well, you can't wash your hands entirely of it. You are complicit to some extent. And I say this as someone who holds dollar balances today. Like it's not a fun thought exercise, but I think it's true.
The bigger one for me is just like loans in general, because they actually expand the money supply. So instead of just sort of leaving your dollars in a cookie jar that the government can dip into at any time, you're actually one of the hands that go in there and take some money. So for me, that's the bigger moral culpability is expanding the money supply. However small it is. If you have a 45-day loan on your credit card for $50, even that like dilutes the purchasing power of everybody else for some short duration, for some amount of time. I think you're still morally culpable, even if it's a tiny amount. And that's something that I'm honestly trying to get away from. Right? It's like, okay, I don't want to have any sort of like debt facilities, and sort of have that on my conscience, because morally speaking, that's really hard, especially as someone from America, right? Like you have access to a lot of debt, which is honestly what makes you, richer than people in other countries. But, all these other countries, they're using paper US dollars to, keep things the way they are or whatever. And it's that's harder for me than say holding a dollar balance, because in many ways, like merchants won't take Bitcoin, and there's no other way to pay them unless you have a dollar balance, and you gotta eat, you gotta buy stuff. So
it's dirty. It's a dirty game we're all tied up in, for sure. So the author talks about utopianism versus realism. And I guess this would be the lolbatarian thing, right? That we're the utopians. But it seems to me like if you actually get into libertarian philosophy and thinking, that it's very realistic, actually. Maybe we're not giving enough emphasis to the darker side of human nature, like why the things like the state emerge. They're very opportunistic organizations, I guess you might say. But how does the author, I guess, delineate between those two domains? Because the other thing about the state is it's often using, back into rhetoric, it's using utopian rhetoric to sell itself, right? The from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Now all the things coming out of the WEF today are like all this utopian technocratic nonsense. What they're actually selling is just more coercion. So how do we disentangle those two ideas?
Yeah, I mean, the rhetoric is always used, by people to one denigrate one side and prop up the other side. So, and utopianism versus realism, like it's always to sort of make your own vision seem more realistic, and the other visions look more unrealistic. And certainly from the status quo, it feels like it's a shorter jump to go with the regime's plan, because it's usually more of the status quo in some way, shape, or form. Just give us a little more power. You could have everything you want. But the bigger thing here is that it's not really even about the vision, right? It's more about like what's right and what's wrong. It's natural law. It's coercion is wrong, and I think if people saw it in those terms, it would be a lot easier to convince them of it. But the thing is, like we're kind of getting into consequentialism or utilitarianism again. It's like, oh, well, theirs isn't realistic and it won't happen or whatever. But like if you're driven by moral law or what's right and what's wrong, then you would just do things because they're right and not because, oh, they might lead to some consequence that we can't foresee or whatever. And I would say that that's the more stronger argument philosophically. It's to do the right thing for its own sake, and not because, it might be unrealistic or realistic or whatever, because those are all secondary. You do the right thing because it's the right thing, right? Like it's its own reward, and that's the main thing behind natural law. It's not some consequentialist thing or some biologically evolved thing or anything else. It just is. The natural law is, and you either follow it or you don't. And all evidence that we have is that if you fall out of natural law, you're going to be kind of a miserable human being. And that's, and I don't doubt that at a societal level, you become a miserable society once you stop following natural law. So, why not follow the thing that's correct and not the thing that's incorrect?
So there's very simple, right? Do the right thing. But how do you specifically break that down into action steps or it's hard to give a formula for that. So how do you, if someone's like, what do you mean by do the right thing? How do you walk them through that in greater detail?
Yeah, so there is a very deep natural law tradition. And you mentioned before, English common law and how, that English common law like evolved case by case, right? It had to be a real conflict, and then there's a judge that would think about natural principles and rule based on natural law. And if other judges found that useful, they would use that as a precedent to, rule on other things and so on. But it's something that's discovered, and you can. I think most of us have some moral intuitions about things, but there's always sort of like new moral territory that you have to think about and figure out. So think like a good one that came up in the last 20 years or so is like privacy on your cell phone, right? Like it's like, okay, what's the right thing, right? Because it's kind of this weird area where do you have possession of your data or and like is it right for government to like be able to snoop into it and so on? And this is something that Supreme Court justices have had to like think about. Okay, do you need a warrant to go search a phone or whatever? And those are very useful questions. The thing about natural law and figuring out what the right action is that it requires a significant amount, not just of knowledge, right? Because although thankfully we have a conscience and we have some guide to what's right and what's wrong, but it requires a significant amount of virtue, right? Like following what you know to be right is not easy, and it does not come easy to most people, and it's this. discipline, and it requires a lot of sort of moral cleansing, or confession of sin and reform of the heart. That's very unpleasant, honestly. But that's what's required, and most people don't want to go down that path, even though I think ultimately it's what aligns your dialectic and rhetoric, and it aligns your whole self and puts you in a position where you can really truly appreciate life and have fulfillment. But that's not a place that people want to go, because it is just so difficult. It's the hard work of virtue.
Yeah. Something like taking it very like we have this very materialistic paradigm, right? We believe in things like the laws of physics, right? Like those work, that's the bottom of reality. But there is this equal, I don't want to say opposite, but there's an equal counterpart to hard material physical laws. And it is these moral, ethical laws, right? It's like very simple stuff, but hard to do consistently. Like really try to always tell the truth, or as Peterson might say, at least not lie, right? Don't be coercive, don't be violent, do not cheat, do not steal. Like when you actually seriously follow these things in your life and you act as if God is always watching, then your life actually improves. It's not just it doesn't seem to me like it's just an epiphenomenon, I guess maybe would be the term. It's like it's something that's real. Like there's certain principles that make a plane fly according to the laws of physics, and there's certain principles that make your life fly according to these ethical, the ethicality encoded by natural law, let's say for summary purposes. And how do we get people to take that more seriously? Because we are a society that's drifted from God and religion, and that's where these things tended to be housed. And now, I don't know, is there a way to bridge the gap between the scientific materialist worldview and the need for these ethical principles?
Yeah, and you brought up the right point, right? Like it is the sort of materialist bias that's sort of like the base framing for almost everything that's sort of undermine the spiritual reality, which is that there is natural law, there are moral things, there are ethical considerations, and they've almost always been sort of like undermined in some way. But you can't live without ethics, right? You can't. No society runs without some level of morals or ways of functioning. And this is, ironically enough, what we found out with like smart contracts or whatever in the industry that we're in, is that there's a lot of sort of inbuilt assumptions about moral law that you can't that are very hard to codify into digital bits and whatever. It's actually extremely difficult, and this is why you had judges, right? You had people at it. If it was just a matter of a rule, then you can just sort of adjudicate based on that rule. But it's a deeper one. It's a spiritual law, and you need a conduit to interpret that and at least look at it objectively and say, okay, what is the right thing here? And it is very difficult. And it used to be something that people studied very deeply, but because of this materialist bias, it's kind of gone by the wayside. And I would argue that it's actually taken a lot of the materialist knowledge and put it into sort of like that realm of uncertainty again, because in many ways, like science and a lot of the materialist things have more or less stopped because of this lack of respect for natural law. So you have stuff like in physics of like string theory and things like that, which have zero evidence, can't even be proven or disproven, but continue to be popular mostly because there are people in positions of power within the physics community that propagate it, right? Like that their careers depend on it. This was their thesis. This is what they published a lot on. So they can't just sort of throw it out. Like if you were concerned with natural law of what the right thing was, well, the right thing when you have a wrong theory is to, or like a useless theory, is to throw it out.
Right.
But they don't do that, and you end up affecting the materialist worldview or the search for truth there, because you don't have this metaphysical base of natural law. So it's all connected, and you know, I think about what you know, what Jesus said, or like I think it's a quote from C.S. Lewis. If you aim for earth, you're not going to get anything, but if you aim for heaven, you get earth thrown in. And I think at a deep level, this is what that means: is that, you know, you have to have this spiritual, metaphysical, natural law grounding for everything else. Otherwise, the entire foundation crumbles and you have nothing.
Right.
And that's the unfortunate reality of sort of like the intellectual milieu that we're like sort of swimming in, is that it's very naturalist based, but they're essentially giving up the baby along with the bathwater, and they've undermined the branch that they're standing on, and they're in free fall.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Because you need this moral, ethical foundation for institutions like private property, and you need private property to have very advanced scientific enterprise and therefore thinking, and the leisure to have the time to think about these far out theoretical things. If you then start attacking the foundation or disregarding the foundation or whatever, then the whole thing's going to crumble, basically. That's an excellent point. Okay, so I've kept you probably long enough here to try to tie this thing up. You've laid out how to do the right thing. What is the right path from here where we are today toward decentralized capitalism?
Yeah. Well, I think, and I'm sure your listeners of this podcast are very familiar. Like, I think you need to reform the money, because the money drives all of this stuff. Like, including like the scientific endeavors, right? You have rent-seeking positions instead of individuals that are sort of like working because they love the science, right? Which was the model of science for a very, very long time. We made tremendous progress because you had sort of like people that were hobbyists that were trying stuff and figured out like this, two-slit experiment and figuring out the wave particle duality of light and stuff like that. Like, it doesn't happen. These people were doing it for the love of it rather than because they were paid by the state or paid by some institution, and now you're having to satisfy the institution instead of like wherever the truth may lead you. Yeah, that dynamic happens all over the economy because of the money. You have this printed money, and this rent-seeking bureaucratic administrative class grows by leaps and bounds. It's getting to the point where it's starting to teeter at the edge, I think, of hyperinflation or a complete breakdown of all this stuff. The branch that they're sawing off is almost sawed off at this point. So we're getting to that point. So the reform of the money, I think, is the key to a lot of this stuff, because it allows this fiction that we can sort of create our own reality, which is ultimately what
a lot of this rhetoric is, a lot of this political authority, and what it's all used for is this illusion that you can suspend reality for permanently, but you can't. And the bill comes due at some point, and in many ways it's already here and now, right? Like, the inflation that you're experiencing is in many ways paying for all of the excesses of the previous generation. So once the money is reformed, then you can get on a sound footing on all this other stuff, because the rhetoric can't be paid for. The sort of like status schemes that are the major thing that sort of in society, it's currently determined by the money. But I think it goes back to something else once you remove this fiat money, which is all centrally controlled and so on. If it goes back to virtue, if it goes back to how much you provided to others and so on, and you have real sainthood instead of like this weird secular sainthood where people like Warren Buffett become like pop or whatever. That I think starts reforming everything else, because we are very status-driven creatures, and if you have the right status game in place, then I think everything else follows naturally. But the status game is so determined by the money that everything gets corrupted along with it. And, I think you reform society by first reforming money.
That's a brilliant take on it. There's the connection between the status and the money, and that's a good framing for it. I think it's also a great place to bring into a close. Jimmy, thank you so much, man. Always good to see you.
Yeah, it's nothing YouTube studio. It's a good place to be, and it's always great talking to you, man.
Awesome, man. Thanks for going.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.